Grandpa Carl was at it again. "We have a bombing mission," he was shouting in the nursing home. His family was embarrassed. The nurses were upset. Nobody knew that this 97-year-old crazy grandpa had actually flown 47 bombing missions into Hitler's heartland as a navigator. Until his old WWII buddies found him 78 years later. The story I'm about to tell you might be one of the most touching stories you've ever heard, because this isn't just the story of a war veteran. This is a story about how we look at our elderly, how we listen to their words, and sometimes how we misunderstand them. Carl Stevens' family had been visiting him at the nursing home every day for 3 years. But every time, they experienced the same embarrassment, because their grandfather kept shouting, "We have a bombing mission. We're flying to Berlin," disturbing the nurses and scaring the other elderly residents. The doctors said it was the effects of Alzheimer's. The family apologized, feeling ashamed, until that day, when a 92-year-old man came to the nursing home. The moment he saw Carl, he froze and said, "My God, Navigator Carl, you're still alive." That's when a 78-year secret was about to be revealed. Hello, welcome to the Last Stand channel. Do you also have an elderly family member? And do you think the war stories they used to tell were real or imaginary? Share your experiences in the comments. It was breakfast time at Meadowbrook Nursing Home. Nurse Linda was making her usual rounds, giving medications to the elderly residents room by room. But when she reached room 14, she paused. That voice was coming from inside again. "We have a bombing mission. We're flying to Berlin. Is the crew ready?" Carl Stevens was 97 years old, white-haired, with blue eyes. He'd been living here for 3 years and repeated the same sentences every day. Nurse Linda shook her head and entered the room. "Mr. Stevens, it's breakfast time," she said gently. When Carl saw her, his eyes lit up. "Nurse, report that the crew is ready. Our Liberator is waiting." Linda smiled sadly. Alzheimer's disease had trapped Carl's mind in 1944. Dr. Morrison had explained to his family, "These types of patients live in the past, especially in the strong memories from their youth." The war period must have been very impactful for Mr. Stevens. But the family had never mentioned this. Carl's son Richard and grandson Michael always experienced the same embarrassment when they came to visit. Their grandfathers' constant war stories drew attention from other families and disturbed them. That afternoon, Richard Stevens and his son Michael had come to visit Carl. Carl got excited when he saw them. "Richard, son, I have great news. We bombed Regensburg today. The heart of the Luftwaffe is shattered." Richard hung his head. "Dad, please, try to be quiet here." "Quiet? Son, we're fighting for America's freedom, our flying fortress." "Dad." Richard snapped. "These are fantasies. You never went to war. This is the effect of Alzheimer's." Carl's face crumpled. Deep sadness appeared in his eyes. But I was a navigator, on the B-24 Liberator." Michael looked at his grandfather. He was 16 years old and couldn't understand his grandfather's condition. "Grandpa, the doctor said these things aren't real. Your mind is confused." Carl fell silent. He looked out the window. "My friends, they're waiting for me." Nurse Linda watched this scene from a distance. Her heart ached. Carl's family meant well, but they didn't understand the old man's feelings at all. Dr. Patricia Morrison had Carl's file open on her desk. Richard Stevens sat across from her. "Doctor, my father is getting worse. These war stories. We can't stand it anymore. Other families are complaining." Dr. Morrison adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Stevens, this condition is very normal in Alzheimer's patients. Patients usually cling to strong memories from their youth. The 1940s must have been very impactful for your father." "But doctor, my father never served in the military. I never heard anything like this." "Mr. Stevens, the disease sometimes creates fantasies that seem real to the patient. What's important is that you support your father and manage this situation without hurting him." Richard nodded. "But how?" "He constantly talks about bombing missions, scaring other elderly people. Stay calm. Instead of opposing him, try to change the subject. This fantasy world is a safe place for him." As Richard drove home, he was thinking, maybe his father had watched too many war movies. Maybe he had such fantasies in his youth. 3 weeks later, an unexpected visitor came to Meadowbrook Nursing Home. 92-year-old Frank Kowalski was being taken on a nursing home tour by his daughter Sarah. The old man was walking slowly with his cane, curiously examining each room. When he saw Carl in the dining room, he stopped. His eyes widened. His mouth fell open. This can't be possible," he murmured. Carl was telling Nurse Linda at that moment. The weather was bad today. The clouds were very low, but as navigator, I had to find the route. Frank Kowalski approached. His heart was beating fast. "Excuse me, are you Carl Stevens?" Carl turned his head. When he saw Frank, his face changed. For a moment, the cloudiness in his eyes disappeared. Yes, I'm Carl Stevens." "Who are you?" "I'm Frank Kowalski. Tail gunner, 447th Bombardment Group, B-24 Liberator, Lucky Lady." At that moment, everyone in the dining room fell silent. Carl stood up. His hands were shaking. "Frank, Tail gunner Frank, you're alive?" The two old men hugged each other. Both were crying. Sarah Kowalski was surprised to see her father Frank hugging Carl. Nurse Linda immediately called the nursing home director, Mrs. Henderson. "Dad, who is this man?" Sarah asked. Frank wouldn't let go of Carl's hand. "Daughter, this is Navigator Carl. If it weren't for him, none of us could have returned home. This man saved my life." Carl's eyes were shining. "Frank, you're really here. I thought I'd lost everyone." "No, Carl, I'm here. And I never forgot your story." Mrs. Henderson approached. "Gentlemen, please, can you explain to me?" "Carl's family says his war stories are fantasies." Frank looked at her sternly. "Fantasies?" This man was navigator on 47 bombing missions. 447th Bombardment Group, 8th Air Force, Berlin, Regensburg, Hamburg. Every time he brought us home, Carl straightened up when he heard Frank's words. Yes, I remember. We started in 1943. My first mission was Schweinfurt. And our last mission was Berlin, February 1945. That day the flak was so heavy. We lost Pilot Jimmy. Carl's voice broke. Frank nodded. "Yes, Jimmy Morrison. He was 22 years old. From Texas." Mrs. Henderson immediately called Richard Stevens. "Mr. Stevens, you need to come urgently. There's a very important situation regarding your father." Richard left work and rushed to the nursing home. His son Michael followed him. When they entered the dining room, they found Carl talking with Frank. "Dad, what's happening here?" Carl looked at his son. For the first time, there was clarity in his eyes. "Richard, this is Frank Kowalski. He was our tail gunner on Lucky Lady." Frank turned to Richard. "Son, your father is a hero. In 47 missions, we never got lost, because Carl Stevens was one of America's best navigators." Richard looked in astonishment. But this isn't possible." "My father said he never served in the military." "I never said that." Carl's voice had strengthened. "You never asked. After returning from the war, nobody wanted to talk about our losses, our friends. That's why I stayed silent." Michael approached. "Grandpa, did you really fight in the war?" Carl took his grandson's hand. "Michael, I just did my duty. But yes, I fought, and my friends died." Frank pulled out an old photograph from his pocket. "Here's proof. 1944, taken in England, Lucky Lady crew. In the photograph, 10 young men stood in front of the aircraft. Carl was in front, smiling in his navigator uniform." Richard took the photograph. His hands were shaking. This is really my father." The next day, Frank had brought his daughter Sarah too. Sarah was a retired archivist and had decided to research Carl's story. "I can find Mr. Stevens' military records," Sarah said. "If he really served, there must be records." Frank sat next to Carl. "Carl, do you remember? You had a Distinguished Flying Cross Medal. They gave it after the 25th mission." Carl thought, Yes, there was one. But I hid it, at home, in the attic." Richard was surprised. "Dad, I never saw such a medal." "Because you never went up to the attic, in my old suitcase, next to your mother's wedding dress." Michael got excited. "Grandpa, can we go look today?" Richard was hesitant, but he was starting to get curious. "Okay, let's go." In the Stevens family's old house, there really was an old suitcase in the attic. Richard hadn't cleaned this place for years. When they brought down the suitcase, Carl's eyes sparkled. "Here it is, your mother's wedding dress." And Michael opened the suitcase. What came out shocked everyone. The Distinguished Flying Cross Medal, pilot logbook, dozens of photographs, and official documents. Richard picked up the medal. It read, "Staff Sergeant Carl Stevens, Navigator, 447th Bombardment Group, Courageous Service in Combat Operations." My God. Richard's voice wouldn't come out. Carl was shuffling through the photographs. "Here's Jimmy Morrison. Here's our bombardier Tom and radio operator Eddie." Michael opened the logbook. Inside, 47 missions were recorded by hand. Dates, targets, flight times. "Grandpa, you really were a hero." Carl shook his head. "No, Michael, I just did my job. The heroes were the ones who died." As a result of Sarah's research, Carl's story appeared in the local newspaper. Secret hero at Meadowbrook, WWII veteran silent for 78 years. When the news spread, unexpected things happened. Old veterans, history enthusiasts, even representatives from the Pentagon started coming to visit Carl. Colonel Patricia Hayes came from the Air Force History Office. "Sergeant Stevens, your service in the 447th Bombardment Group is in our records. You really did complete 47 missions." Carl smiled modestly. "I just did my duty, Colonel." "No, Sergeant, you served extraordinarily. According to our records, thanks to your navigation, you never lost an aircraft." Frank was beside him at that time. "Colonel, without Carl, none of us could have returned home. He was our angel." As a result of Sarah's research, 3 more surviving members of the Lucky Lady crew were found. 89-year-old bombardier Tom Henderson came from California. 91-year-old pilot Robert Clark came from Arizona. The reunion held at Meadowbrook Nursing Home created emotional moments. After 78 years, 4 old men were together again. "Carl, do you remember the Berlin mission?" Tom asked. "The flak was so heavy we thought the plane was falling apart." But Carl stayed calm. Robert said. He said over the radio, "Hold course, we're going home." Carl's eyes filled with tears. "We lost Jimmy that day, our pilot. He was the youngest." Frank put his hand on Carl's shoulder. "But you brought us home, buddy. You brought us home." During the reunion, the surviving crew members decided to honor their lost friends. Carl told the story of each one. Jimmy Morrison was our pilot, 22 years old, from Texas. He had a 19-year-old wife at home. Eddie Sullivan, radio operator, from Boston, son of an Irish family. He always sang. Mike Kowalski, Frank's brother, top turret gunner, 20 years old, from Chicago. As he named each one, Carl's voice trembled. For 78 years, he had lived with these memories inside. Richard whispered to his son, "Michael, now I understand. This is why your grandfather never wanted to talk." Michael looked at his grandfather with different eyes. "Grandpa, how did you become so strong?" Carl took his grandson's hand. "I wasn't strong, Michael. I just kept living for my friends." Colonel Hayes suggested organizing an official medal ceremony for Carl. "Sergeant Stevens, your service has never been honored as it deserved. We want to correct this." Carl tried to refuse. "Colonel, I just did my duty." "No, Sergeant. You saved the lives of 350 crew members in 47 missions. This is an extraordinary achievement." The ceremony was held in Meadowbrook Nursing Home's garden. Local people, veteran associations, military representatives, and Carl's family attended. In his speech, Colonel Hayes said, 78 years ago, young men risked their lives for our country's freedom. Sergeant Carl Stevens was one of those heroes. He served silently, returned home silently, and lived silently. Today, we break that silence. After the medal ceremony, Carl's relationship with his family completely changed. Richard now saw his father differently. "Dad, I apologize. I didn't listen to your stories." Carl took his son's hand. "Richard, you didn't know. I didn't tell, because it was too painful." Michael now visited his grandfather every week, listening to his war stories. "Grandpa, you're my hero." "No, Michael, you're my hero, because you represent the future." Carl's Alzheimer's disease continued, but now his family approached him differently. Instead of seeing his war stories as nonsense, they listened to them as precious memories. Nurse Linda had been very affected by Carl's story. She began to think that other elderly residents might have similar stories. Mrs. Henderson, maybe our other residents also have unheard stories. Maybe their fantasies are also real. Mrs. Henderson nodded. Linda, you're right. From now on, we should listen to each resident's past more carefully. Carl's example started a revolution in the nursing home. Now, they seriously listened to and researched the elderly stories. 3 months later, Frank Kowalski fell ill. He came to visit Carl one last time. The two old friends talked for the last time. Carl, you're my brother. I searched for you for 78 years. I never forgot you either, Frank. You were the bravest tail gunner. Carl, I'll tell you something. Jimmy Morrison's daughter is still alive. She also wants to know her father's story. Carl's eyes lit up. Really? Jimmy's daughter? Yes. She's 75 years old now. Her father was never mentioned. She's also looking for lost stories like you. 2 weeks later, 75-year-old Margaret Morrison came to visit Carl. She knew nothing about her father, Jimmy Morrison. Mr. Stevens, what can you tell me about my father? Carl told Margaret her father's story. Jimmy was our best pilot. He was only 22 years old, but he always brought us home safely. What kind of person was he? Jimmy was always smiling, singing Texas songs. And he always talked about your mother. He'd say, "My little princess is waiting at home." Margaret started crying. I am that little princess. I never knew my father. Carl took Margaret's hand. Jimmy loved you very much. He fought for you in every mission. Margaret's story attracted great attention in the media. An association was founded to research the lost stories of war veterans. Carl's story led to the discovery of dozens of similar stories. The program called Carl Stevens Project began researching the stories of elderly people in nursing homes. The result was surprising. Dozens of crazy elderly people actually had real war stories. Carl became the honorary chairman of the project. Maybe we should listen to the elderly better, he told reporters. Carl Stevens died at age 99. Hundreds of people attended his funeral. Veteran associations, nursing home residents, his family, and the owners of lost stories he had found. His tombstone read, Staff Sergeant Carl Stevens, Navigator, 447th Bombardment Group, Silent Hero, Voice of Lost Stories. Richard spoke at the funeral. My father taught us that sometimes the greatest heroes are the quietest ones, and sometimes the greatest stories are the stories waiting to be heard. After Carl's death, the Carl Stevens Lost Stories Research Center was established in his memory. While Meadowbrook Nursing Home continued its normal operations, this new center opened in the city center researched, recorded, and honored the stories of the elderly. Nurse Linda now managed this center. Carl taught us that no story should be lost. Every elderly person has valuable stories to tell. Michael was now 19 years old and studying history. Thanks to my grandfather, I understood that history doesn't live in books, but in the memory of the elderly. Today, more than 200 lost stories have been discovered at the research center. The forgotten heroisms of WWII, Korea, and Vietnam veterans have come to light. Carl Stevens' story teaches us this. The words of our elderly that we call fantasies might be real stories that need to be heard. And maybe today, there's a hero story waiting to be heard in your family too. If you enjoy these powerful stories, don't forget to subscribe to the Last Stand channel. We continue to bring you more hero stories every day. Carl Stevens' story is not real, but there are millions of lost stories like his. Maybe today is the time to listen to an elderly person. Every silence hides a story. Every elderly person is a history book.